This is the intersection of money and power, and South Africa is in the throes of it now. You're watching Political Capital. I am Karabole Tlhahla. All the president's donors, that is still top of mind for many in the country. The 500,000 Rand donation made by the controversial and corrupt services company Bosasa, whose dealings have been exposed during the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into allegations of fraud and state capture. But behind Bosasa is a family steeped in South African anti-apartheid history, the sport of rugby, and oddly enough, a Christian bond. On the show, we will be speaking to the best-selling author of books like Steinhoff, Inside South Africa's Biggest Corporate Crash and Blackout, the Eskom Crisis. Author James Stein has teamed up with Paul Vichitio to pen down the new offering, the Bosasa Billions, how the ANC sold its soul for bribe packs, booze, bags of cash. James is my guest, and keeping with that murky dealings of corruption in the legal process, we will also be giving you some highlights of the State Capture Commission from yesterday, where former head of the NPA, Mxolisi Nxasana, detailed a troubled relationship with his boss, Jacob Zuma. But first, James-Brent joins me now from Cape Town to discuss his latest offering, the Bosasa Billions, how the African National Congress sold its soul for bribe packs, booze, and bags of cash. James, thank you for your time. As always, you have been a friend to this channel. My first question is a bit tongue-in-cheek. When are you going to stop making money out of national tragedies, James?
It's never about trying to make money. If it was about that, I'd be writing full time. It's about trying to tell these stories, because I do consider them fascinating insights into our society, and the stories are just incredible. People would think, if you look from the outside looking in, that half of the stuff that happens in this country can't possibly be true, but they are, and it's my privilege to be able to tell some of them.
You live in a privileged country, James. For an author, it's definitely a country that keeps on giving. Now, the story of the Watson family is very integral to this company, Bosasa. It's a story that's steeped, as I said in my intro, in South Africa's anti-apartheid history, their informed worldview that wanted them to play in inclusive rugby teams, as well as Bosasa, what it has become and how it has come to pretty much enthrall the presidency of at least the current incumbent Cyril Ramaphosa through his donations, as well as former President Jacob Zuma. Fill in the story here. Who is Bosasa? How do they end up giving billions in cash to ANC comrades?
Probably millions, but still, it doesn't matter much. The company itself got about 12 billion Rand in tenders, work from government institutions mainly. This is a services company, as you've mentioned yourself earlier, and they started out as an empowerment vehicle for high-profile members of the ANC Women's League in 1996. And then Mr. Gavin Watson was pulled in about a year or two later. And from there, this company grew. They got their hooks, I suppose, into companies like AXA, even private companies like Sasol as well, a company like the South African Post Office. And then they saw a big fat opportunity at correctional services. Who really cares about prisons, right? I mean, the worst of our society is thrown in there. Nobody really seems to care much about these people. Interestingly, Judge Edwin Cameron, who retired today, was one person who actually did care a little bit, but more about that later. But yeah, so it was this utilities company, services company, and they started providing catering, and they also ran a repatriation center called Lindela. So from there, this company just started growing once they started getting their fingers onto these fat government contracts.
More is known about Gavin Watson really now than it was before, but the star of the family for a while was, of course, Daniel Watson and his son, of course, Luke Watson, who both played rugby and were very synonymous in that. But when I think about the Watson family, I can't get away from the anti-apartheid past, and as well as, the Christian religion within that family. And when one listened to Agreasy, he spoke about, when he was at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, he spoke about how prayer really, led as a precursor to all these corrupt dealings. How do they reconcile family with what happened in Bosasa?
Isn't it interesting, the irony, giving yourself, and they continue to believe that to a large extent, that they're absolutely religious Christians. Their father, the old man, Daniel Watson, the father of Gavin and Cheeky, he was a lay preacher, hailing from Somerset East. So they had these deep religious roots. And at the business itself, Bosasa, they were known to have up to 2-hour prayer sessions every morning, starting at about 6 to 8. Known for strange practices, Angelo Agrizzi himself stated at the commission how at some evenings that there would be these sessions where pastors would be brought in to pray for Gavin Watson, who would be lying on the ground, spread-eagled, I suppose, like a Christ figure in a sense. So strange happenings, and yet, these kind of cash bribes that were happening, 4 to 6 million rand per month. How you reconcile that, I don't know. Fascinating irony.
Yeah, and I know you try to make those kinds of reconciliation within the book, but without really giving it away. I mean, there was an element of cult-like, status of Gavin Watson within Bosasa itself. Do you think that was just a function of the times, or do you see it as a concerted way in which he duped a lot of people to ultimately be that loyal and that long to his company?
Look, speaking to a lot of people who have remained loyal to Mr. Watson, employees and others, they still believe he's innocent. They still believe he's this very religious figure who's got their best interests at heart, and that he's done no wrong. There's many people, senior people as well, that still believe that. And we'll have to see how it all comes out in a real court of law one day. I mean, this hasn't been tested before a judge yet, so we'll have to watch and see. But certainly, the evidence contrary to living this life of virtue and innocence, it's just overwhelming. So, as part of me, I didn't have the opportunity to speak to Mr. Gavin Watson himself, despite several efforts to do so. They just said that they won't be speaking to me. Sadly, so I couldn't get their side of the story. But several figures very close to Gavin Watson did speak to me on and off the record. So that did provide some context. I suppose for me, in a sense, trying to understand it is that, one can be religious and see nothing wrong in something like redistribution, I suppose, if you want to call it that. Perhaps that's their way of justifying what's happened here.
That would be a funny redistributing only to the guys at the top. But it is a curious case. Where is Gavin Watson? Because even after the Bosasa confessions of Angelo Agrizzi at the Zondo Commission, we went on to see some of the senior figures within the ring being pulled in front of law authorities. And I'm speaking about Patrick Gillingham, I'm speaking about Angelo Agrizzi himself, Andries van Tonder, as well as Lyndon T, who was a former corrections commissioner. But we didn't see Gavin Watson anywhere near the courtroom. Why is that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Look, the arrests of those six or seven people, including Mr. Agrizzi, who was the key witness to this unbundling and uncovering of the Bosasa state capture story, related to a 2009 investigation by the SIU. So this is for 10 years. There's been a report that's found evidence and said these people had to be charged. For 10 years, nothing happened. Suddenly, 2019, Mr. Agrizzi goes and testifies at a Zondo inquiry of investigation into the state capture. And lo and behold, within days of him finishing his evidence, he's arrested on these 10-year-old charges, along with other people who also testified and were key witnesses at Zondo. And in the process, up to 30 other key witnesses who were going to whistleblow, insiders at the Bosasa group, they pulled out and said they would no longer be testifying. So you make of that what you will. But certainly the arrests were related to the very old report. Whether we can expect further arrests of other individuals, including someone like Mr. Watson, time will have to tell.
The funny part is that, of course, one cannot speak about the Watson family, which, in a greater sense was behind Bosasa, without speaking about the other member of the Watson family, and that's Daniel Cheeky Watson. And of course, Daniel Cheeky Watson was head of the Eastern Province Rugby Union when it went into administration, and finally players did not have any money, couldn't draw any salaries from an administration that was running perfectly well before then. And there was all kinds of aspersions about how he wouldn't want auditors to get near those books. But Cheeky Watson, it's still the recipient of one of the highest national orders one can receive in this country. He remains a recipient of the Order of Ikamanga. And the Watsons, as a family, have been very close to the top of the ANC hierarchy, if you will. They have been familiar with different ANC presidents. Are you surprised that Gavin Watson's money, whether solicited or otherwise, found its way, maybe through, a force of habit, into Cyril Ramaphosa's 2017 ANC presidential campaign?
The long, convoluted question. Firstly, I did interview Cheeky Watson. He was the one Watson brother was willing to talk to me on the record. He didn't want to talk about his brothers or the business on the record, but he did on the record speak a little bit about the Eastern Province rugby mess, where he claimed to me that he had inherited an unfixable situation. When he'd arrived there and taken over the rugby union, the players were sleeping on the floor in the offices, and there was no money in the bank already. So that's just some background. With regards to President Ramaphosa and the stories going on about money that had been put into his campaign when he was running for ANC president, well, you see, here's what bothers me about the whole thing. I don't understand how President Ramaphosa or his campaign managers, because it seems like they were the ones who seemed now to be taking the fall for having solicited the funding, how they could get into or accept money from a company with these massive clouds hanging over its head. There's been these clouds of controversy and concern about where they've been making their money around Bosasa for many years. So if you are running on a clean slate, no corruption, tackling corruption, fixing the country, how do you even associate with a company that's got these kind of shadows, casting these kind of shadows? I don't know. But what's certainly concerning is that President Ramaphosa has a lot to answer for, I'm afraid. And the kind of action that he's been taking seems to be shying away from trying to tell us exactly what's happened. It's about trying to block certain documents from coming out. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to hide. With regards to the ANC in general, it must also be noted President Ramaphosa was the deputy president of the ANC for many years under President Zuma, as well as being president of the ANC at the moment. So, and there's no doubt that the party had many functions paid for it by Bosasa. They had the election war room paid for it by Bosasa. So the links are are quite close.
Mm-hmm. If there was no Bosasa, do you believe there would still be a need to create a Bosasa? At least how it served the political elites?
I think that that Bosasa is not the only company which buys favors, which gets favors from the ANC, and possibly other political parties as well. I think that business and politics go hand in hand for as long as man exists and democracies exist or countries exist. So we must be under no illusion that lobbying does happen. And funding political parties does happen, and that's not illegal. What is illegal is when senior politicians are receiving gifts, not declaring them, receiving payments on a regular basis, and these are people in very high positions where they're able to facilitate business opportunities for those private individuals, private companies. That is certainly is illegal. But there's no, there's a difference between companies that provide funding and companies that are getting something back in return. I don't know if that clarifies the question to you. But so the point is, if Bosasa was not there, somebody else would have taken the gap. I mean, we've seen the Guptas, for example, and there certainly are others as well.
James, final question. Do you feel that Bosasa could lead to the unraveling of the Ramaphosa presidency?
It's very possible. It's a massive. It's the biggest crisis of his presidency besides ESCOM, which is a big crisis in itself.
Some might say a bigger crisis.
Yeah, for sure. Look, it's keeping me awake at night. I don't think we understand the extent of the risk ESCOM poses. But this Bosasa mess and the ongoing murkiness around it is massively concerning. I think it is a big concern to the president, and I think he needs to get his house in order quickly. But you see, he's surrounded by other individuals at the very top of the ANC with similar dark clouds around their head. So the big problem, that the underlying thread running through all of this state capture problems, state entities that are in trouble like ESCOM, SABC, the underlying challenge is the ANC's inability to take the right political action to fix things. There's no political will to do what needs to be done. So, maybe something happens, maybe something doesn't happen, but certainly it is a concern, and the president needs to take action, or, we'll have to see what happens.
President Cyril Ramaphosa may indeed win the legal victory, but the moral question will still be there for him to account to. Thanks to author James-Brent, the co-author rather, of the Bosasa Billions, how the ANC sold its soul for bribe hacks and bags of cash.